Hi, I'm Marc Lynch, Director of the Project on Middle East Political Science and the Institute for Middle East Studies at George Washington University. Welcome back to our series of POMEPS conversations with leading scholars of Middle East studies. With me today, I have Dr. Ilan Peleg of Lafayette College, a longtime observer of Israeli politics and author of a very wide range of books on the subject. And I thought that since we have you here today, it might be good to talk about the immediate effects of the recent election in Israel and your sense of what it might mean for the state of Israeli politics today.
Yeah, I think the recent elections really introduce a measure of uncertainty and, in fact, instability into the system. I think the system, quite unusually, has been quite stable for the last 4 years under Prime Minister Netanyahu, and I think the new elections actually leaves this stability behind, because it's not entirely clear what kind of government, what kind of coalition will emerge as a result of these elections. And I think that the variety of options I've looked at, and we can talk about it in some details, indicate to me quite a lot of instability in years to come.
Now, at the time we're recording this, we don't know what the coalition will look like. But let's go back a little bit. Many people thought that the rise of the settler movement was going to be a major part of the election. And you've written quite a bit about Israeli identity and how the settlers have changed and affected Israeli identity. What were you thinking as you were watching the election campaign and the rise of this new party? What does this tell you about what Israeli politics is becoming?
I think that the settler movement is still very, very strong. Most of the commentators focus on the new party, Habayit Yehudi, under Naftali Bennett, but I think that focusing exclusively on that party does not really give you the full picture. And here is the reason. Within the Likud party itself, you have clear-cut radicalization. You have the inclusions of people who quite clearly have not been included in the Likud party before, now included, particularly people like Moshe Feiglin.
You mean from the primaries?
That's right. That's right. The primaries, in effect, changed the structure of the party itself. Of course, also the fact that Netanyahu felt that he has to have a coalition with Lieberman, who is himself a settler. This is quite meaningful as well.
So the change actually took place before the election?
As well as during the elections itself. So I think that this is quite meaningful, and all of it has to be taken into account.
So what does this mean for the peace process then? I mean, do you side with those who say that a two-state solution has essentially become impossible, or is this something which you see as reversible?
I think it's reversible. And the reason I think it's reversible is that there is an international consensus that includes, of course, the United States, China, Russia, the EU, and the United Nations is very involved, pushing for a two-state solution.
Does Israel care about an international consensus?
I think that there is a lot of opposition indeed to it. But I think that this is still, by default, if you will, the only realistic solution to this long term.
But if the settlers have become so powerful in the Israeli electoral system, and we've seen how extensive the settlements have become on the ground, what reasonable prospect is there that that might be reversed?
Yeah, we have seen, I think, in the past, and I think in this regard, my tendency to look at history is quite useful. We have seen in the past that you sometimes have a reversal of a process, sometimes under the most unlikely circumstances. So, for example, I've written my first book deals with Begin's foreign policy. The fact that Begin decided, for all sorts of reasons, to give back the Sinai and also to recognize the national rights of the Palestinian people have been quite a revolution in Israeli thinking, and something that has not been predicted ahead of time.
So do you think that
this is an example of things that can happen once any kind of negotiations begin.
Do you think that the conditions are there to make Bibi a Begin?
Not really. Not really. I must say that so far I've not seen on the part of Benjamin Netanyahu a tendency to move in this regard. He has, of course, given the famous Bar Ilan speech in which, in principle, he accepted the two-state solution. However, he has not been acting aggressively or at all on that particular prospect. So I would not say that he is really ready. But for example, if you have a new coalition that includes people like Mr. Lapid, Ms. Livni, and others, he may be pushed more and more toward the reopening of serious negotiations with the Palestinians.
Now, you've written before about the nature of Israeli identity and kind of the way that the peace process interacts with those internal debates. And let's go back again before the elections and your sense of Israel over the last couple of years, and especially in light of the Arab Spring and the changes in the region. What do you see as the major trends in Israeli identity politics?
I think the Israelis, and as somebody who has written a lot on the Arab Spring, you'll appreciate it, have looked at the Arab Spring in my opinion, in a somewhat one-sided manner, as totally and entirely and inalterably negative. I myself have responded to it by arguing that indeed there are some negatives in terms of the Arab Spring, but there are also the possibilities of some positives.
Like what?
Well, for example, of the emergence of more democratic politics. Even in the case of Egypt, even though the regime had become an Islamist regime, it is certainly much more open to the public in Egypt than regimes before.
Now that might be better.
Remains to be seen what will happen with Syria and Jordan and other places.
But taking Egypt, that's better for Egyptians, I believe. Is it better for Israelis?
I think that there are some dangers for the Israelis. In the sense that the street, as you know, so to speak, the Arab Spring is not particularly friendly toward Israelis. And indeed, the patterns on the part of Israelis has been that it has proven for them to be, for it to be easier to negotiate with non-democratic, dictatorial, semi-dictatorial, authoritarian, even monarchical governments, as in Jordan and in Egypt, than to negotiate with democratic governments, which Israel still did not have a chance to do.
Now, I remember a book which argued that the only way that Israel could make peace with its neighbors was if they became democratic.
Yes.
And that, of course, was written by Benjamin Netanyahu.
Exactly.
Does he still believe that?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting irony, and I think that history does like to play ironies, that the argument on the part of Netanyahu has always been, unless the Arabs become democratic, we cannot really talk to them. Now, the Arabs are becoming maybe not a model democracies, but to some extent more democratic, more open, more reflective of public opinion. And now the argument on the part of Netanyahu and other people on the right is that Israel's situation is much more serious and so on and so forth. But again, I think one of the interesting things about the recent elections is that apparently the public has not, did not really buy this argument. Because I think the recent elections there are many different ways of interpreting it, but it is certainly a repudiation of Netanyahu's leadership on a variety of issues, possibly the Arab Spring itself.
But it was notable how little discussion there actually was of the peace process or of Israeli-Palestinian peace in this election campaign. Do you see any reason to believe that this would actually return as a major, like the new government will pursue a peace opening, or does the fact that it wasn't really discussed in the campaign mean that it's likely to stay on the sidelines?
Very difficult to know. It very much depends on the kind of government that will emerge. So, for example, if Tzipi Livni is invited back into the government, her almost single-handedly important issue was a return to some kind of peace process. Lapid also hinted in this direction, maybe not convincingly enough. I think he puts much more emphasis on equality, so-called equality of burden among Israelis. But it remains to be seen whether this issue will come back. But even beyond that, I would argue that the peace process does not depend entirely on domestic Israeli factors. You have some unknown, such as the Arab Spring, such as American engagement during the second Obama administration, such as even the possibility of a third intifada. So you have a set of factors that are outside of the Israeli political system that may have a tendency to push the Israelis back towards some kind of negotiations.
If you had the opportunity to give advice, would you urge Washington to re-engage on Israeli-Palestinian talks now?
Absolutely.
What do you think it would achieve?
Well, I think that anytime you do anything of that nature, I think the president puts his reputation on the line, and the possibility of a backlash and loss of prestige and so forth is quite significant, as we have seen last time under President Clinton. But I think the chances has to be taken.
Why?
I think there are lots and lots of interests that the United States have in terms of creating more stability in the Middle East. I think there is now what I would call, or what could be called, an international consensus on the shape of the deal. I think many of the people in Israel believe in it. So, for example, if you look at the Israeli public opinion till this very day, there is a majority for a two-state solution, against, of course, a very, very powerful settler lobby that I think is powerful in the Likud, in Lieberman's party, and, of course, in the Bennett party, as against some of the others.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see what kind of government emerges. And thank you, Dr. Ilan Peleg from Lafayette College, and thank you for listening to the POMEPS Conversations.
Thank you very much.